Carrie Lauer, thanks for joining us again. We're excited to speak with you about what you have to say tonight. You've lived in New York City.
I have.
Yeah. What did you do there? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had the real privilege of launching a new initiative with recent college graduates in New York City. So we helped recent graduates connect to, whether they knew God or not, to connect more deeply with God, with community, and with their purpose.
Okay, cool. What was your favorite part about your time there?
Mm-hmm. Well, there were so many things that were so fun about it. It was one of the most organic things I've ever been a part of.
Okay.
One of my favorite things, though, was just journeying alongside, particularly women that I mentored and helping them discover who they are wired to be and then what God's purpose is in living out their vocational call. Okay. So I think of my friend Robin, who is a nurse and also a registered dietitian, and she is starting her own business, helping women process intuitive eating, how to honor their body and care for their body, how to embrace the body God's given them. All the while she's talking about her own journey and how Jesus is setting her free in that. Or my friend Jenna also started her own business in a coaching business to help people figure out what their vocational calling is and helping people represent who they really are in their interviews. Or my friend Jeff, who works on Wall Street. And, there's so much of an image that comes with that. But really, people that understand a vocational calling from God in the business world understands that it's not about the bottom line for them, but about really an economic engine to push down resources to people of all aspects of life. And so it was a privilege to watch men and women understand this is what I believe God's calling me to do. And as they did that, they would talk about the reality of Jesus in their life in a really seamless, beautiful way, as people were like, why are you so passionate? And it was because God's call was on their life.
Thinking about their vocation in a totally different way.
Exactly, yeah.
So what would you want college students in particular to understand about God's heart for them and his purposes through them as it relates to your vocation?
Mm-hmm. Well, Frederick Buechner, who has become a favorite author of mine, at least this year anyway, has a great quote. He says, "The place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meets."
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Significant.
Yeah. So when I think about college students as they get to know who Jesus is, that in order to be called, you have to have a caller, right? So there's the person, the triune God, that is shaping and working and molding these men and women into who he's made them to be, and also burdening them with passions and gifts and desires that are really about God's redemptive work in the world. So God's a worker. He worked in creation. He worked 7 days and then he rested, right? Mm-hmm. So God invites us into a rhythm of work and a rhythm of rest as people who are image bearers. So everybody's an image bearer of God, and everybody that's connected to Jesus has a caller. Mm-hmm. And that when we think about the narrative of Scripture, that God's inviting us into his story, there's a 4-part narrative. There's the creation, where, as we know, it was absolutely perfect and beautiful. God made all things and said it was good, created Adam and Eve in God's image. There was intimacy, there was flourishing, all was right in the world. Mm. And then there was the tragic fall where Adam and Eve rebelled against God. And so a deep and significant brokenness entered the world. But from the beginning, God had a plan of redemption, right, in the person of Jesus. So there's creation, there's fall, and then there's a great picture of redemption where Jesus enters the picture and he brings a reconciliation, not just between God and people with one another, but even God and creation. Mm-hmm. And in the end, there's going to be a glorious picture of restoration. And so you might be thinking, what does that have to do with vocational calling? Well, there is a reality that in redemption, God wants to bring his redemption, I believe, biblically, through a vocational calling in our life. That it's not just about individual salvation, that Jesus has saved us, which is so important, very, very important, not just that we're saved, but also that we get to invite others into a relationship with God that has eternal perspective or eternal significance, but also that God's inviting us to bring the fullness of redemption even now as his kingdom is very present now. So there's theologians call it the already not yet of God's kingdom. So Amy Sherman wrote a book called Kingdom Calling that I think is so great. And she talks about this. The glorious truths celebrated in this too narrow of a gospel, meaning if the gospel is just for individual salvation, in themselves capture the full, grand, amazing scope of Jesus' redemptive work. For Jesus came preaching not just this gospel of personal justification, but also the gospel of the kingdom. Jesus' work is not exclusively about individual salvation, but about the cosmic redemption and renewal of all things. And so as God works in hearts to say, this is the world's deepest hunger, and this is my deepest gladness of what I'm made to be, then the intersection of that, I believe, is a vocational call of God on our lives.
Yeah. I heard a pastor once say that if you think about yourself, regardless of what your vocation is, you're an undercover missionary. So that you're going into the medical field or teaching or whatever, but you're actually a Christian first or a missionary first, and then that works itself out in your job. It's a great perspective. So what are some examples of people that you could think about using their vocational calling to bring about this kind of incredible flourishing?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the organization called International Justice Mission, or IJM. Yeah. So the man that started International Justice Mission, committed believer, brilliant man, Gary Haugen, he actually was the State Department's representative to investigate the genocide in Rwanda in the early 1990s. Horrific event. And Gary tells his story that he said, I went to Rwanda and I said, God, where were you? Where millions of people were slaughtered in cold blood. And he said he experienced the Lord saying, no, Gary, where are my people? And Gary began to realize that God is calling his people to be his representatives of justice and righteousness and shalom in the world. And so he began an organization called International Justice Mission. There are over 30 million slaves today in the world. And he started an organization to work with the rule of law in countries all over the world to really abolish slavery. And I was at an IJM conference and I heard a woman named Holly Burkhalter speak. And she was a lobbyist. She worked for International Justice Mission. But when I heard her introduced, her resume was unbelievable. She helped get HIV vaccines to Africa under the Bush administration. I just thought, I want to know her story. So I just went up after she spoke and I said, Holly, what's your story? And she said, well, I didn't believe in God. She goes, I had seen so much brokenness and atrocities in the world that I could not believe that there was a God that would allow that to happen. She goes, I was left politically. I will always be left politically, and I was agnostic at best. She said, then I began to meet people like Gary Haugen, who had a Christian worldview and also went into the jaws of evil to make a difference where injustice was so great. And she said two things happened. I began to think, maybe there is a God because there's these people that are following him to these places. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met were going to some of the darkest places of the world. And then she said a second thing. Then I realized more and more what an asshole I really am. So I use that as a quote. Right. But the point was that God was convicting her of sin because he was softening her heart to the reality of his presence and who he is and his character, that he's compassionate and passionate about justice in the world. And there's another man named Blair Burns who came to Christ through Cru at James Madison University who works with International Justice Mission as well. And he was introduced at a conference as currently the best abolitionist alive today, or the most competent abolitionist alive today. So Blair's heart was connected to the heart of Jesus as he came into right relationship with God through the person of Christ because somebody shared the gospel with him. And as he grew in his relationship with Jesus, he realized he had a passion for justice. And he said, yes, Jesus, I will follow you, my caller, into some of the darkest, most dangerous places of the world to make a difference in your name.
Yeah, I mean, those are two really great examples, and that's great for Gary. Some might say that's great for Gary, that's great for Blair. But what does that mean for people who aren't, quote unquote, that gifted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what's true is that everybody is an image bearer.
Yeah.
So everybody is amazingly gifted. And everybody that comes into a relationship with God through the person of Christ, God is working to call. So as image bearers who know Jesus, to say, Jesus, I will be who you want me to be. I will do what you want me to do. I will go where you want me to go. A full-on surrender is really the heart of really beginning to understand his vocational call in our lives. It doesn't matter if you're a Gary Haugen. What matters is that you explore, just ask yourself, what are some of my passions? What burdens me? What makes me want to pound the table? What do I wake up thinking about in the morning? What would I do for free? Just because I am burdened by the heart of God. And you ask yourself questions like, what are my burdens? What grieves you? What evokes anger? Where do you have holy agitations where you go, that ought not be in the world? Or what are my passions? When and where do you experience, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm made for. I'm sure you experience that. Or even, what are my gifts? What are my natural gifts? Like, some people have natural gifts of accounting, and I just think, poke my eyeballs out. I would never, and then they say, no, I like it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think to really acknowledge, to give God the honor, acknowledging that everybody's an image bearer. And as we come into a relationship with Jesus, everybody has the Spirit of God living inside of us, and he is calling us out to redemptive work, whether that be full-time ministry, which is a significant, or to be a doctor to bring healing, or to be an economist to talk about an economic engine that blesses all people. So I think it's important to realize that it's not, my deepest gladness really isn't about me. My deepest gladness is about the heart of God that he's put into me, that I get to participate with him. And it's just quite a beautiful privilege.
It's quite a perspective shift, but it changes everything.
Right.
Yeah. So what gets you really excited when you think of students living out their passions for the glory of God? What really gets you amped up?
Well, I'm excited about this next generation. And I am excited about men and women who are willing to take risks for what they really know is true and right. And even with the modern technology, like, the capacity to have a movement for good is unbelievable. So I'm excited about this generation because I believe that the gospel brings redemption. And so the world is in desperate need of authentic community and redemption. And in that, I think this next generation really values integrity. It's like, I need to live out what this Jesus is asking me to do. And I love that. And so the combination of those two things, and then everybody going, what is my deep gladness? And what is the greatest world's hunger? And how would Jesus want me to show up to be a part of that? All the while in a seamless way, talking about the incredible salvation of grace that Jesus offers us in him. I would also say, I think it's important to be patient with yourself, that, I'm still discovering who I am, and I'm much older than people listening to this right now. And so I think to be patient with yourself and try a lot of new different things to then discover what you're really wired to do.
Yeah. I like the image that you talked about too. Pounding the table. What are you pounding the table about? What's your holy agitation? That's great. So there's one last story from New York City that you like to tell about someone named Destiny. Why don't you share that with us?
Destiny is so aptly named. I just think God's hand is on her life. She came to Christ at Texas State University as a sophomore in college, and she is an absolutely gifted actor. She has a phenomenal voice. And she came because she wanted to believe God to tell redemptive stories through theater and the arts. She came to New York City, and I had the privilege of meeting her. And I remember sitting in a corner diner with her, and she said, Jesus is going to use my generation to turn the world upside down. And I thought, I think you're right.
Yeah.
So as she auditioned in New York City, she would be sitting next to women who looked a lot like her, they were vying for the same role she had. And she realized, I believe that I can be a part of creating a community among African American women where we can actually be one another's allies and not one another's competition. And how can I help my peers, African American women, write beautiful stories, sing beautiful songs, tell great redemptive stories in life, whether or not they know God. And in this process, she started a nonprofit called Bold, where African American women come and help one another be better. All the while, Destiny gets to talk about Jesus because he is the compelling reality in her life, and people are coming to Christ left and right. And so it's a thrill to watch someone like Destiny understand her gifts and passions and what God's called her to, and to take risks to live that out by faith. It's unbelievable to watch.
Yeah, that's a really great way to kind of end our time tonight. Thank you so much for the challenges that you're bringing to us to help students think intentionally about vocation, maybe in a way that they've never done before, through the gospel lens that we need to be processing all of life through. Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.